Welcome to the podcast. My name is Father Bill W. I'm an Episcopal priest in long-term recovery, living here in Austin, Texas, coming up on 50 years sober. And purpose of these podcasts is to try to go a little bit deeper into some of the 12-step history and the 12-step psychology and the 12-step spirituality. So that's what they're about, and I hope you're finding them helpful. And if you are, please tell a friend. We want to get this message out to as many people in recovery as we possibly can. And if you're watching us on YouTube, we've recently moved a number of our podcast episodes over to YouTube, and do the usual thing there, guys. Do the likes and ring the bells and all that sort of stuff. It really does help us in getting the message out to more and more people. So finally, I do want to thank our donors who make this work possible. I've had some generous people who are supporting me in this effort, and then more and more people kind of coming along and doing it. I don't get anything, never try to take a penny out of this work, but we do have expenses, as we say. So we are starting a new series, and it's going to be on a subject that I think every alcoholic and addict of any sort ought to find of interest. It's on a topic called the shadow, and that really refers to the dark side of our personalities. And I'll be going through a book. It's a book by Robert A. Johnson. It's called Owning Your Own Shadow. And those of you who've been participating in these podcasts know that I'm a Johnson lover, and we've done a couple of his books before. We did Inner Gold and we did Transformation. So might send you back to listen to those if you find Johnson's work is particularly helpful to you. He certainly was for me. Jung is important in AA history. He started the process off, one might say, in sending his patient Roland Hazard to try to find a psychic change, to really go deep inside and change at the deepest levels of the psyche. And thank God Roland was using Jung as a therapist and not Freud, or we'd all be studying our sex drives and that sort of thing, which do need to be looked at. But we will kind of get to that when we get to some of this shadow stuff. Wilson was very grateful to Jung. He had some correspondence. We did a podcast on that as well. But here's the thing: Jung is difficult to grasp, to understand. And about 30 years ago, when I started diving into this stuff, I found the works of Robert Johnson to be particularly helpful in taking difficult material and making it more accessible to me, and then other people who've been on this inner journey have reported something pretty similar. So we do shadow work in our 4th and our 10th step. We try to look at what it is that's really going on beneath the surface. And the big book says we're not saints, and we all have to do this digging. And if we do the digging, it may be scary at first, but in time we come to see the real benefit, the payoff of going inside and finding these dark shadow corners of our minds and engaging with them, making them conscious. That's really what we're attempting to do, to make the unconscious conscious. And as addicts, I think we understand this split that we have inside of us, that there are parts of us that really want to recover, and then there are parts of us that want to say, the hell with this, and we have these voices inside us. And so the shadow is that part of us that's repressed, denied, pushed down. It's the parts of us that we think are unacceptable. And the way we develop this is very early in life. We're trying to become members of our family, members of our communities, members of our cultures, and they do things a certain way. And if you don't do them that way, you kind of have the finger pointed at you. You're shamed in many ways. And so these shameful parts of us that are perhaps going on inside of us, they get pushed down. They get relegated down to the basement. Robert Bly had a nice expression for this. He said it's like he was going through life, starting as a kid, and anything that wasn't acceptable, he had this bag that he was dragging behind him. And if this part of himself was unacceptable and you weren't going to like it, and he didn't want to show it to you, boom, into the bag it went, and then traveled on a little further till he found something else that kind of fit that category. And that too goes into the bag. I use the expression, send it down into the basement, lock it up, push it down. And that's what we do. And that's fine if those demons would stay there. But they have a way of coming up the stairs again. They have a way of creeping out, and then they surprise us. It's kind of this Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. I mean, that's what that story is about. Or the Christmas tale of Scrooge, where Marley's ghost is coming to visit him at night. This is shadow stuff. He's living his life at one level, and then at another level, it's almost like there's another person inside. As an addict, I remember I'm very shy. I'm not one who seeks the limelight. And once I got drunk and I led a sword fight with a roommate of mine in college, and led a sing-along with 500 people. Could never have done that sober, but drunk, another part of me came out. And it doesn't only come out, what we learn eventually is it's not just when we're drinking and drugging, that there are parts of us that are stuffed down inside, and they have a way of coming out, usually at the wrong time. And I recall one episode where early in sobriety, but it's happened since, where I got really angry, trying to be this nice guy, but I just got so frustrated. And this anger, rage comes up. And I did it to a counselor guy who's a friend of mine. And I had to go back to him the next day and say, hey, Charlie, I'm sorry. I need to make an amend. I wasn't myself yesterday. And he was a better counselor than I was. He said, oh, yeah? If you weren't yourself, who the hell were you? He had me. Who was I? I was that part of me that I'm not really in touch with. That part of me that I want to hide from you and hide from me. And it came out. And I know lots and lots of alcoholics and addicts who said, boom, there I am trying to, do my little serenity prayer, be a good little boy and girl, and boom, this thing comes out. Shadow. Thought I had it under control, and there it is. So that's what we're going to be kind of taking a deep dive into. What is this world of shadow? How do we get it? How does it manifest? And most importantly, Johnson is going to help us in terms of how do we bring it into consciousness. So let's see. I think what I wanted to do in this first episode is start off with Johnson's introduction. We're not going to get very far, but I think he lays a nice framework for what the problem is and how we're going to find it. Okay, so I'm going to read his introduction. Again, the book is Owning Your Own Shadow. He's a great writer. Starts off. It was said that Dr. Jung's favorite story went something like this. The water of life, wishing to make itself known on the face of the earth, bubbled up in an artesian well and flowed without effort or limit. People came to drink of the magic water and were nourished by it, since it was so clean and pure and invigorating. But humankind was not content to leave things in this Eden-like state. Gradually, they began to fence off the well, charge admission, claim ownership of the property around it, make elaborate laws as to who could come to the well. They put locks on the gates. Soon, the well was the property of the powerful and the elite. The water was angry and offended. It stopped flowing. It began to bubble up in another place. The people who owned the property around the first well were so engrossed in their power systems and ownership that they did not notice that the water had vanished. They continued selling the non-existent water, and few people noticed that the true power was gone. But some dissatisfied people searched with great courage and found the new artesian well. Soon that well was under the control of the property owners, and the same fate overtook it. The spring took itself to yet another place, and this has been going on throughout recorded history. One of the things I learned very early in recovery from a therapist was that the life of an institution can be very much like the life of an alcoholic or an addict, that they take on the same characteristics. And you can look at this story that Johnson is telling from Jung, either at two levels. You can look at it as the story of spiritual institutions, how they carry a shadow behind them, look really good on the surface, all right? But underneath, the water is not flowing. The intent that the institution had in the beginning is drying up. And the same thing happens to an addict. You know, this energy, see, in the shadow, in the deepest parts of our psyche, there's great energy. And if we're just trying to be good, instead of trying to be whole, watch for the energy to start drying up. Watch for recovery to start becoming boring, restless, irritable, discontent, until what? Till I have an explosion of some sort. I wasn't myself. Oh, yes, you were. But you're another self, along with this outside self, along with this persona, this image, this mask that we wear. And we have to do it. He'll make that very clear in the book. We have to do it. But we also have to find balance, because there's also a world going on inside of me. And that's the world that I really need to be getting to in my fourth step, in my 10th step, in my watching. Watch for the water. Is it flowing or is it not? Johnson writes, this is a very sad story, and Jung was particularly touched by it, since he saw how a basic truth can be misused and subverted into an egocentric plaything. Science, art, and particularly psychology have suffered from this dark process. But the wonder of the story is that the water is always flowing somewhere and is available to any intelligent person who has the courage to search out the living water in its current form. See, sometimes in a 12-step meeting, people are 20, 30 years sober, and they're talking about how things were 20, 30 years ago. Well, that's nice, helpful even. But what's happened yesterday? What's going on today inside of me? You know, how is my alcoholism or my addiction showing itself inside? You know, that's the stuff. And if I can get in conscious contact with that, make it conscious, then my it's not a 20, 30 year ago deal. It's wow, look what happened yesterday. Look what I got in touch with today. It's exciting stuff. Water has often been used as a symbol for the deepest spiritual nourishment of humanity. It is flowing in our time in history, as always, for the well is faithful to its mission, but it flows in some odd places. It has often ceased to flow in the accustomed sites and turned up in some most surprising locations. But thank God the water is still there. Many people say, I went to church for this and I wasn't finding what I'm finding in my 12-step group. Why? Because many of the people in church are not digging real deep. They're not going inside. But an alcoholic and an addict, if you're really going to want to have quality sobriety, you got to do the digging. You got to make conscious what is unconscious. You got to go, like Jung said to Roland Hazard, on a spiritual journey to effect a psychic change, a change at the deepest levels of our personality. Get a hold of that, and you're really on to a life in recovery that is filled with meaning. In this book, Johnson says, we will examine some of the odd places in which the water of life is flowing these days. As always, it's free and it is fresh, as much the living water as ever before. The main difficulty is that it is to be found where one least expects it. This is the meaning of the biblical phrase, what good could come out of Nazareth? Here's the Pharisees, and they're confronted with Jesus, and one of them says, well, what good could ever come out of Nazareth? They're looking at a certain well, and Spirit has a way, just like the water in this story, has a way of, if it's not accepted, if it's not being drunk from, the well is going to dry up. What good could come out of Nazareth? Nazareth is now holy to us, the birthplace of Jesus. But in biblical times, it was the wrong side of the tracks, in the least likely place to find an epiphany, an appearance of the Spirit. Many people fail to find their God-given living water because they're not prepared to search in unusual places. It is likely to turn up in Nazareth again and be as ignored as before. Jung had an expression that those who haven't found God haven't looked low enough. It's like we search for God out there in the sky, in the universe. But he says that's not where you need to look. Where you need to look is inside of self. What is at the depth of my own personality? What's at the depth of my own need? Where is it when the ego runs up against the wall and says, I need help? You know, that's when you're going to find God, not in a theology book, but often in the gutter, you know, often when your back is up against the wall. You know, the Oxford group prayer that I loved when I first stumbled upon it. They said, oh God, if there's a God, please help me. It's not like you even have to believe. You just have to be thirsty. You have to be thirsty enough for the water of life, that you've dried up, and you're on then a spiritual quest. One such unexpected source is our own shadow. Now, this is the important part that he's getting to. That dumping ground for all those characteristics of our personality that we disown. As we will see later, these disowned parts are extremely valuable and cannot be disregarded. As promised of the living water, our shadow costs nothing and is immediately and embarrassingly ever present. To honor and accept one's own shadow is a profound spiritual discipline. It is whole making, W-H-O-L-E, whole making, and thus holy, and the most important experience of a lifetime. To own our true selves, to find our true selves first. It's not pretty. It's scary at times. And yet what Johnson will make very clear in the book is that there's also the gold hiding in there amongst the rubble, amongst the shadow. Alcoholics and addicts, we fight really, really hard to deny some of the best parts of ourselves. Is oftentimes you give a compliment to an alcoholic, and he's going to brush it off, or she's going to deny it. No, that's not me. Well, there's gold in there. There's gold in them there hills, in them shadows. And so that's what Johnson is going to introduce us to. Take us on a journey. Go down that basement, open up the doors, see who's in there, and welcome them. Welcome them. See, that's what happened in Faust when we did that piece on transformation. Mephistopheles changes, and Dr. Faustus changes. Well, one becomes whole, integrates those separated parts of ourselves. We do this all the time. We say, I'm an alcoholic, and I'm sober, I'm both. So these contradictions, these coming together of opposites, is really what is at the base of this shadow work. So I think what I have found is a couple of stages to two-way prayer. You can do two-way prayer, and I did two-way prayer for many years, and it was very helpful to listen to this unconditional source of love within my mind, within my psyche. That was very reassuring, very helpful. But then there's a second layer to it. And I don't know when you're able to do it, maybe 3, 5, 10 years, maybe a week, I don't know, maybe never. But then there's to go in and do inner child work in your two-way prayer, to listen to the kid, to listen to the one that you left behind, all right, the child that got abandoned. And this is what we do. And that's a part of our prayer, you know, very much a part of our prayer. It's not just saying words. It's reintegrating with some of the deepest parts of me. And then I think the final one is to do shadow work, to meet the split off parts of self, to engage with them, to bring them to the surface. And what you find is that each one has a gift that you've been hiding from yourself. So to find that gift, to extract that gift, and then to live in balance, you know, Johnson will introduce the concept of the seesaw. It's finding balance. It's not diving just into the shadow, and it's not living at the level of persona all the time. It's finding the balance. There's a time and a place to share deeply. There's a time and a place not to share deeply. How do I know those places? How do I find them? That's, I think, what this series will help us navigate. Okay, so I hope you'll find it of interest. Again, I will put in the show notes a link to getting the book. It would be helpful to get a copy, but not necessary. I'll probably read substantially from it, and because Johnson has a way of expressing things much better than I could ever do. So there I am denying myself again. Okay, I'll look at that in my shadow work tomorrow. Well, once again, thank you for listening. Hope you did find this helpful, and don't be afraid of it. Keep coming back. Bye-bye.